Before we begin, thank you very much to Bombburst's secret Patreon account for rejoining the Patreon campaign. I've seen you there before. Glad you came back. I appreciate that a pretender has to pretend to not be a patron because they need a dupe account for it, but you know what? Any way you can support, I do appreciate. So thank you very much, Bombburst. Okay, so we've got a lot on the table today because we are going to be looking at Starscreams. We've done this a little bit before. However, I have this different format I tried a little bit ago. I enjoyed the format, so we're going to do it again, and Starscream is a perfect palette for it. We are not just going to be looking at 5 Starscreams and, you know, a top 10 of Starscreams that are good. We're going to be looking at 5 good ones and 5 bad ones. Because, let's be honest, for as popular as Starscream is, there is a lot of just wrong depictions of the character from over the years, as well as some truly standout ones, both past and present. So we're going to be discussing back and forth. And we're going to start with probably the lowest hanging fruit of all of them. We start with the bad so we can end on the good at the end of the video. And of course, the first bad one, we got to talk the '07 Starscream, the original live action Starscream. This is just not Starscream. Like, you could have put any kind of weird name on this character, and I would believe that it was that character. And I don't just mean in design. Yes, he looks like a shrapnel Dorito, but that's not the point. In character and tone, he is nothing of what Starscream should be. He's a toady. He's just like this, like, subservient grunt to Megatron. You know, he doesn't show any form of trying to take over or enjoying his place of authority. When they get to Earth, he is the Decepticon in command. But they still go after Megatron, and he shows no sign of being against this. Now, you could tell me that, well, there's comic books that kind of add the G1 elements in. You could see where he is power hungry, or it's like Blackout and Barricade who are pushing him to get Megatron recovered. And let's be honest here. The comics can be written after the fact to patch things up, but what's on screen is the only thing that's actually canon to that fiction. And what's on screen is a Starscream who is cowardly, sniveling, and in no way shown as particularly powerful, threatening, or any kind of, you know, secondary to Megatron. There's a scene where he literally gets beaten with his own arm. It's not a good Starscream, in the least. Now, if you want good Starscream, we will continue to pick the low-hanging fruit and talk about the Armada Starscream once again. Now, I've talked about it before, but if you missed it the first, several times, the genius of this Starscream is that they removed his power-hungry element, but pretty much kept everything else the same. He has an ego to him, and while he wants power, he really doesn't want authority over the Decepticons. He just kind of hates Megatron. And that seems like a simplification, but when you take that need for leadership out of his equation, it opens him up to many possibilities that didn't exist before. What you ended up with was a more noble and honorable take on Starscream. You end up with a Starscream who's willing to join the Autobots and even befriend a human or two. Very different depiction from what a Starscream traditionally got, and really the first time we'd ever seen any glimpse of a heroic Starscream in any fiction before this. With the exception of a little bit in the Generation 2 comic, but that's kind of a side effect of the storytelling. It wasn't a lasting thing. This Starscream had nuance and depth to him, which honestly for Unicron Trilogy is something of a surprise, because generally their storytelling and character depictions weren't all that strong, but Starscream came out ahead really, really well. Until we got to Energon. Energon is just such a sad franchise and series in general. The toy line is great. I love the Energon toy line, but my God, the storytelling, the show runs out of plot halfway through. There's about 20 episodes where they just float through space shooting at each other with no clear goal or objective in mind. It's just very repetitious and boring, drawn out, long in the tooth, would be the old phrase to use for it. So through all this exhaustion, we got Starscream, who is a resurrected version of the Armada Starscream, but brainwashed by Megatron, because Megatron was really big into brainwashing in Energon. It was kind of his hobby. So he did it to Starscream and made this Starscream. Now, while it's an interesting depiction and a cool take on the ghost Starscream from G1, the character is not Starscream. Again, it's not Starscream. He is just a blindly loyal warrior for Megatron. And that's it. There is no depth. There is no nuance. There is no need for power. There is no dislike of Megatron. There is no hint of being a traitor of any kind. There is nothing. There is just blind loyalty to Megatron and just following his orders throughout the series. Just being his right-hand man with no subtlety, no change, no deviation, nothing. Terrible depiction. Absolutely terrible characterization. Such a wasted opportunity when you let off on such a good Starscream to lead into such a boring one. Yeah. Energon in general is just a lot of missed opportunities storytelling-wise. There's a whole video just about the, somewhere down the line, top 10 ways Energon should have been better. We got to do that at some point. But for now, we might as well finish off the Unicron trilogy, and we'll talk about another good Starscream, which is the Cybertron Starscream. Keep in mind, in the Japanese continuity, Superlink and Galaxy Force were completely separate series. Yes, there are some characters that share similar styles and designs, but in canon, they are completely different characters. The characters that we had of Armada Red Alert and Cybertron Red Alert, those are the same characters on the English side of things. And the Japanese side of things, they are two distinct characters who happen to share design elements. That's it. So this kind of went back to Starscream's roots. He is now power hungry. He is treacherous. He wants leadership of the Decepticons. What makes this Starscream great is that he lacks the cowardice that most Starscreams tend to have that hold them back from actually accomplishing the grand coup that finally lets a Starscream take over. The result is a Starscream who proves it can be done. This is a Starscream who took on over a dozen Autobots by himself and won through pure grit and determination. This is a Starscream who would have aced Undertale. The point being, he pulled it off. He becomes the leader of the Decepticons, albeit temporarily. And for a while, yeah, the most powerful character in the show, when he basically steals, 75% of Primus's spark. Good on you, Starscream. You did great. This is the Starscream that proved it could be done. And sometimes, and again, all you have to do is take out that one element and you get a completely different Starscream. In this case, it was the cowardice. And there are plenty of Starscreams who do that later on. And then there are Starscreams who go completely the other way. Literally. And that brings me to Shattered Glass. Now back on the bad side of things. Don't get me wrong. Shattered Glass is fun. Just as a fun sci-fi trope to play with, there's a lot of fun you can have in the Shattered Glass universe. The problem is we are talking about the IDW take on Shattered Glass, which does have a lot of flaws to the way that it is written. Case in point, Starscream here is very loyal to Megatron, and he is ultimately a heroic character, but he still keeps a lot of the snarkiness and ego of the original Starscream. And I feel like it's the writers trying to actually keep him connected to how he originally was, but that's not Shattered Glass. The fun of Shattered Glass is a complete inversion of the original characterization. Like the original, BotCon Shattered Glass Starscream is full-blown Paragon. He is the paladin, lawful good type. Very boisterous in his intention to do heroics and his fierce loyalty to Megatron and, the Decepticon cause. It's supposed to be that. It's supposed to be campy and cliche that it's so over the top and inverted. And that's the fun of it. The original one is a lot of fun. To see him crying over the death of Megatron in that series, that's weird. It's so weird to see. And that makes it fun and engaging. This Starscream just feels too much like Starscream. Like when he is like standing there boasting about how he outsmarts Blur. Okay, congratulations, but now you start to feel like the old Starscream, and that starts to feel wrong. It's a rough one. It's a rough one. I've never been a fan of IDW's take on Shattered Glass. It just felt like they didn't want to do anything risky with the brand at that time, and it led to some overall underwhelming stories that I think really had all the reason to be better. Okay, back to good Starscreams, and now we're going to go to Transformers Prime. Of course, this Starscream is going to make the list. It's Steve Blum as Starscream. The voice alone could get him on this list. This is one of those Starscreams that emphasizes a particular element of the character. In this case, we're getting one of the most cowardly depictions of Starscream, but also one of the most sinister, because he just has a presence to him. Even though he will cower the second Megatron raises a fist in his direction, and he will run from a battle the moment he realizes he's in over his head, at the same time, he just has this menace to him. Like the way he is depicted genuinely feels like he is one of the most evil and vicious of the Starscreams that we ever got. That said, there's also a scene where he dances. There is, again, nuance to the character. There is his friendship with Knockout. Nuance to the character. You know, and though he is just kind of, again, a kind of toady to Megatron, he still has these moments that kind of elevate him away from just being, you know, a weak Starscream. He's a very good one. A very good one. So, yeah, not a whole lot more to say. I feel like when this iteration came back in Robots in Disguise, I felt like he was a little bit underwhelming in that show, even though he did start pulling off Grand Coup stuff the way you would expect a Starscream to do. So it's kind of interesting that they continued it in a weird way. But honestly, like, there's a balance and uniqueness to this one. Just the way he, like, held over the fact that he killed Cliffjumper over everyone. And that's like his shiny hat. It's Starscream showing off his shiny hat. Look what I got. You know, I got a kill. You know, so, and that's his thing the entire series. And it's kind of hilarious. It just kind of holds on. It's like, I'm evil because I got a kill. Which, to be fair, it's very hard to kill an Autobot in this franchise. So good on you. Good on you. Let's stick in the CG world now, shall we? We're going to hop on to another bad Starscream, and this one, yeah, this is one of those fictions where almost no one came out unscathed. We got to talk about the Machinima Starscream here for a second. What happened? Why? Why? So for starters, this was one of two thumbnail options that I had for this one. I wanted something that actually showed his design, so we have the ghostly incarnation of that Starscream. I almost had his combiner incarnation, which was to say a floating Zordon head that captured the other combiners and used them as like floaty energy limbs. Why was Starscream a giant Zordon head with floaty combiner limbs? Because this Starscream was actually in charge of Cybertron. This is one of the Starscreams who pulled it off. Like, amongst the Decepticons, you know, after Megatron, like, retired, he is the highest ranking Decepticon, and he still carries that insignia and loyalty. You know, so he got what he wanted, right? You know, he's one of 3 people in charge of Cybertron, you know, with just the Mistress of Flame and Rodimus Prime in his little, like, mini council. And that's it. He still tries a power grab. This Starscream has zero reason to attempt a power grab. He has everything a standard Starscream has ever wanted, and he still makes a grab for power that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. He's one of 3 people who run the planet. You're telling me he makes this grand power grab for the Enigma of Combination simply to get authority over a whole 2 Transformers? It's mind-boggling to me. Absolutely mind-boggling to me. Especially when you realize that if he had just stuck around and stayed alive, he would have outlived the Mistress of Flame, and he also would have been there for Rodimus Prime to kind of ditch his standing and return to being Hot Rod. Which means this was all pointless. If he had just stuck around and not been an idiot, he probably would have been the only one in charge of Cybertron, and he wouldn't have had to lift a finger, make a power grab, invite Optimus and Megatron to blast him straight in his spark, the things that usually happen to Starscream when he does this stuff. Dumbest writing decision. Dumbest writing decision. If we want a good writing decision, we'll have to go to Earthspark in the newest iteration of Starscream. Well, actually, no, that'd be the Skybound, and that's another good Starscream. But like that Starscream, we haven't seen much of this one, but they're already touching on something that I've never seen a writer actually touch on in 40 years of this franchise, and that is Starscream as a victim of Megatron. It's a Starscream that's actually kind of dealing with PTSD, where he's actually kind of a abuse survivor of sorts. You think about it. I mentioned it before in this very video. Megatron in the movies beat Starscream with his own arm. And you know how many times Starscream has been punched or blasted by some iteration of Megatron in almost every fiction before this. And that's how he keeps Starscream in line. It's an incredibly abusive and toxic relationship he has with his leader. So this is a Starscream that doesn't really want to overthrow Megatron anymore. He just wants to get away because he does not feel safe anywhere around Megatron. And that's fascinating. Also fascinating is a Starscream capable of, again, making a friend. And that is something that's very rare for any Starscream to be able to do. And usually it doesn't end well because you are either like Alexa in Armada, where there's a very bittersweet ending to it, or you are Metal Hawk in IDW, and there's an ending just for you. So typically it doesn't turn out well, but there's something very genuine about his friendship with Hashtag. It even inspires him to kind of make a heroic charge at the end of season 1. Kind of mind-blowing. And again, fascinating way of approaching Starscream, because it's doing something we've never actually seen him do. Now, we're almost at the end of this list. I got 1 bad and 1 good left. So it's long overdue that I threw an entry at you that's just going to upset you. I just need to stir the pot a little bit here. Just a little bit. And just to tell you very briefly why animated Starscream is bad. Don't close the video! Don't close the video. Put the pitchforks down. Hear me out. As a Starscream, he is a good Starscream. He's everything you would expect in a well-made Starscream character. And the fact that this Starscream is the one who came up with the idea of cloning himself to create all the other iterations of the Seekers does give him a huge point in the right direction. I'm not saying necessarily that this Starscream is bad in and of himself. But, when you take him in context of his series, look at what Animated set out to do, and the way it made such interesting changes to the rest of the cast. Optimus Prime was now a young leader in charge of a small group of Autobots, whereas Ultra Magnus was the supreme commander of Cybertron. Megatron was not boisterous and flashy in his weekly schemes. No, he was cold, calculating, and generally built up to one grand scheme rather than a lot of small ones that usually don't work. There's how they handled Soundwave in an interesting way, how they handled the Dinobots in a different way. Can we talk about how different Blitzwing is? And this is also where we get, like, Kid Bumblebee, even younger than he's normally depicted. And this is the beginning of, like, crotchety veteran Ratchet. Through all of that, Starscream is just kind of Starscream. There's no real reinvention. There's no new twist. It's just an egotistical Starscream who's constantly trying to take over the Decepticons. That's basic Starscream 101. And when animated has so many characters around him that are so interesting and different from how they're traditionally depicted, it's kind of upsetting that one of the most well-known and obviously from this list one of the most versatile Transformers characters really didn't get any interesting change to him. So, good Starscream if you're looking for a traditional Starscream, but animated is a show that did things differently, and in that, there was no real difference in the Starscream. So this is where I put him on this list. Little bit of a controversy for you. In order to finish off with a little bit more, we have to talk IDW, because while the Shattered Glass universe was not my cup of tea, I think their 1.0 Starscream is absolutely brilliant. They benefited so much from how long they held the license and the longevity of the stories they got to tell. This is a Starscream who we got very in-depth with. We learned a lot about. He had a lot of different nuances because in order to keep the story going for over a decade, you had to just keep reinventing and re-exploring him. Similar to Megatron and Optimus, the story got to the origin and roots of the character and got to explore, why is Starscream like this? Why does he have such an ego? Why is he so vain? Well, there's a very deep reason for it, and it's kind of a really cool one. It leads to some cool moments. This is also another Starscream who, one, took over Cybertron. And I don't just mean like, oh no, he took over the Decepticons. I mean, he is the king of the whole planet. And you know what? He's the Starscream who pulled off a really grand coup in order to make that happen. And credit to him, it is actually extremely well done. He is an ultimate opportunist. Cue Edge's theme for my wrestling fans out there. However, he also has one of the most drawn out and believable character shifts of any Starscream I've ever seen. When he is, by the end of the series, when he's kind of talking about, like rebuilding Cybertron's infrastructure and creating new power supplies for different sectors. And he genuinely speaks in tones of wanting to do good for Cybertron. I believe it. Because of what the character's been through and the growth that he's gone through, I believe that this is a Starscream who genuinely wants to do good for Cybertron. And it leads, because of the character shift and how much they got to explore, it leads to some of my favorite Starscream moments ever, and it has nothing to do with physical action, combat scenes or anything like that. It's in words. It's a Starscream whose words and depiction was incredibly powerful, all thanks to just how much they got to explore with him. So yeah, absolutely one of my favorites. Again, here's TJ praising IDW 1.0, because that's so predictable, right? But there you go. There's 5 good and 5 bad Starscreams. Or technically 6 good and 4 bad, but there's an asterisk to one of the goods. Depends on how you look at the character. So, obviously, there's plenty of other Starscreams, good and bad, but these are the 5 I wanted to point out today. So, yeah, here's another 5 good and 5 bad. I like this format. I want to think of other things for it. So, expect to see more in the future. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.